Welcome back to the Encore Audio YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. My first group that I ever recorded was Underearners Anonymous. A friend of mine, Frank Brigiotti, who's on my channel, he passed away some time ago. He had some kind of cancer, but Frank was a great guy. He wanted to try to change my name from Taper Dave to Digital Dave. I've still got the shirt, the South Bay Roundup shirt, in my closet that he had embroidered Digital Dave. But he asked me if I wouldn't mind recording this group, Underearners Anonymous, and I said, sure, I'll record anything anonymous. So here you go. Enjoy, comment, and don't forget to like and subscribe, whatever you do. Be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. That helps me out a lot. Doesn't cost you a thing. Just click on the like button. You have a good day if you want to. Take care.
Hi everybody, my name's Eddie. I'm an underearner. Hey. Hi Dion, hey everybody. I'm also an underachiever and an underbeer. I like saying those things because they're truly more me than anything else in my life. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the steps and how these steps came about and what's the difference between studying the steps, taking the steps, working on the steps, and how this all came out to be that people don't know what they're doing as far as the steps goes. Bill Wilson got taken through the steps with Ebby. They did it in an afternoon. It took 4 to 6 hours. Bill Wilson took Dr. Bob through the steps in the afternoon. It took 4 to 6 hours. Of course, they worked the steps thoroughly after that, but that was called taking the steps. But they got the steps from somebody else. It was started by the Oxford group, and in the Oxford group, they weren't alcoholics, but their steps was surrender, which was 1, 2, and 3, sharing, which was 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8 and 9 was restitution, and 10 and 11 was guidance. And then they also had the 6 C's, which was which Bill then turned into the 12th step, which is carrying the message. They had many other things too going for them. And how that actually started is an evangelist was told by somebody in his mission that his problem was resentments. And then somebody later told him it was fear. So he went all over the world doing this conversion one-on-one, and the idea was to convert one soul at a time. And the terminology they used was really odd terminology, and they had some really great books written by the Oxford group. One of the books was Soul Surgery, which is a great, great book. It's a great title. I have it in my bag in my car in case everybody wants to see it. It had other great titles like I Was a Pagan, written by a guy by the name of Vince Kitchen. And Vince was in the same meetings that Bill was in New York. Bill was, Kitchen and Bill were in the same AA meetings. He was a member of the Oxford group, but never became a member of AA. He was an alcoholic. He was one of the first 71 people, and some of them didn't join AA, and some of them did. But anyway, this whole thing of, in those days, and the most powerful 12-stepper in the United States was a person by the name of Sam Shoemaker. He was Bill's spiritual guide. And he's the one that ran the rectory where all the AA meetings in New York happened. And one of the sayings he said is that you are a problem, you have a problem, and all around you are problems. Let me repeat that. He's saying you yourself are a problem, you also have a problem, and all around you are problems, and you are not powerful enough to solve any of these problems by yourself. You're not smart enough, you're not wealthy enough, you're not sexy enough, you're not enough to handle any of these problems by yourself. You're actually powerless. So you need to find the power And then he used to, in 3 or 4 hours, it's called turning somebody toward the power. He wrote a book called I Stand at the Door, which means he stands at the door of showing you how to get the power. And that's how they did the steps in those days. And when Bill had his white light experience, that's what they did. Now, Bill sponsored Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob sponsored 5,000 people in his lifetime. At 4 to 6 hours a time, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. And they have these documents of these people that they know the names of the people that he sponsored, and 75% of them stayed sober through this process. However, on a fishing expedition one day, Dr. Bob said, there's people coming into AA and we don't have. So one of his fishing buddies, who was also in AA, he said, why don't you write up something for us and we can maybe start group work as far as a step goes. And they wrote it up. And at that point, they started AA group meetings of taking the steps. Oh, and by the way, here's a little fallacy people don't understand. In those days, do any of you ever see the picture of Dr. Bob and Bill and alcoholic number 3, Bill Dotson, on a bed? Very often in those days, when you made a 12-step call on somebody, you didn't go by yourself. You took one of your sponsees with you. So it's very similar to what we do when we do an action meeting. We have 2 people there. It's almost the same thing. It's kind of eerie. It's kind of really eerie when you think about it, Anyway, so what they started doing at that point is they would take people through the steps in a formal way in a group. Now, you would then, once you get to the 5th step, you would just one-on-one pick a sharing partner. They would call it a sharing partner. At those days, the word sponsor didn't exist. Sponsor was the guy that wrote the check for you to go into spin dry. That was your sponsor. Okay, and so how they did it in those days is you could either do all the steps in one day in 6 hours, and then when you're done, they gave you a card that said you're an alcoholic, you're a card-carrying member of Alcoholic, and that allowed you then to go to the meeting upstairs where they did the guidance, where they did the meditation, and then they had the real meeting. And in those days, it was prayer and meditation that you did as a group, and then you checked it out with somebody else whether or not you should actually do that. But you had to have graduated by taking the steps, either all in one day in a 6-hour process, or you did it like every Thursday you did an hour and a half, then the following Thursday, and it took you a month to then take the steps. And this is what they call taking the steps. And then if you took the steps, then you were considered recovered with a D, not recovering, recovered with a D. And this was throughout the country like this. Throughout the world, they had meetings like this, okay? Then what happened is, around 46, 2 independent publishers wrote something called the Little Red Book, which was later published by Hazelton in 53, which was another version of the steps. People started reading that, and it didn't have anything in there about taking the steps. It had a kind of a way of studying the steps. And that was okay for a while. And people still use this methodology of taking the steps. So if you worked with a sponsor in those days, he took you through the steps. And another fallacy that is going on today is in those days, the sponsee didn't write the steps. He didn't write his inventory. The sponsor wrote the inventory. The sponsor would ask you a question. And he would ask you the question, for example, what are your problems today? And how the old Oxford group did it is they would ask you a question like, can you guys still hear me? I think it's off now. Yeah, it's on. They would ask you, do you guys know what the bedevilments are in the big book? Okay. He would ask you basically, were you having troubles with your personal relationship? Couldn't you have you had trouble controlling your emotional natures? Are you, it's off, I think. Are you prey to misery? Are you prone to misery and depression? Did you have trouble making a living? Were you full of fear? Have you had the feeling of usefulness? These were the interventions that Shoemaker would make when he would do soul surgery on you. He would start with the unmanageable parts of your life. And if you notice, it has nothing to do about alcoholism. It all has to do with the problems in your life. What are the problems in your life? You are a problem. The problems inside you. You have problems, and everything around you is problems. And then they would ask you, what do you resent? What are you afraid of? And how have you been selfish? And he would write all the things down, and then you would work out an amends list. Because you see, what happened is the people in the early AA alcoholics, they were too sick to write their own inventory. So the sponsor wrote it for you. That's how it was done. Over the years, it changed. And I'm not saying we should go back to this way of doing it. I just want you guys to understand that this is where it's all come from. Then when Bill wrote the 12 and 12 in 1953, people said, oh, this is a new way. And they started studying the 12 and 12, where there's no instruction. And slowly, people stopped taking the steps, and they stopped doing it in this other formal way. To a point, and the other thing that happened in the fellowship is the fellowship got so big that the pure example, the pure task of going to meetings every day could actually keep somebody sober. And Bill Wilson found out about that, and they also started letting in people that were not of the hopeless variety. They had different kinds of alcoholism. They may have just had a drinking problem, and they may not have needed to take all the steps in a formal way. So what happened is AA got mixed up with a bunch of different people, hopeless alcoholics, regular alcoholics, problem drinkers, and this and that. And the phenomenon happened that coming to the fellowship was able to solve their problem. So slowly people stopped doing the old-fashioned way of doing things. Also, an interesting thing happened is other fellowships came along and started saying, oh, we want to borrow the steps. NA came along, and they said, well, we don't want to use the big book. We want to use something else. We'll make up our own version. And they did, and everything's fine with that. There's no problem with that. OA came along, tried to figure out how to do it, so they came up with their own way of working things. And now, eating disorders are a little bit more tricky than alcoholism because it's hard to find out how to figure out what the nature of the problem is and how am I going. Is it just a compulsion or is it an allergy to food? What is really going on there? So the people that started the eating disorder step workshop, like the step work, like Fred Schneider, the founder of HOW, saw that people were having problem being abstinent. So what he did is he created a bunch of elaborate questions that would focus people to study the big book. The idea was if you study the big book hard enough, then you would be able to stay abstinent. And so consequently came up with a bunch of questions, the 164 questions, then more and more books were written, more and more questions, more and more inventory. This was all in an effort to try to create abstinence because the mystery of what food addiction really is wasn't really well understood. And it's still not well understood. Nobody agrees on anything on that. It's not like alcoholism. Everybody agrees on that it's a disease. So, and NA came along.
The people on the phone bridge, it's muffled. If you could back away a little bit
Okay.
from the mic.
Okay, great. So what happened around that time is DA came along, and DA didn't have its way of trying to work the steps, so it ripped off the questions from HOW and just changed eating disorders to deading. And then I think UA did the same thing about a year and a half ago. They took the DA questions, the little yellow book, and they did their own versions. Now, in the meantime, also what happened is in the 50s, therapy started getting involved, and you had the therapeutic community in the hospitals and the rehabs. And the rehabs couldn't use a Christian model or anything like that of the steps. They had to have their own tracks. So they created a psychological model. And in those days, the whole thing changed. For example, High Watch, which was one of the first rehabs in Connecticut, and then Hazelton in Minnesota, they did the Hazelton model, which means you stay in treatment for 5 months. You do a formal first step. And the difference was also with the formal first step is people, see, in early AA, there's no question, you knew if you were an alcoholic. And Bill didn't work with you unless you acknowledged you were an alcoholic. So you didn't have to do any work on the first step. However, when rehabs came along, they had to convince you that you're an alcoholic. So you had to write a bunch of questions on how you're powerless, and how your life is unmanageable, and how the compulsion hits you, and endless questions. And you, when I was in rehab, it took me first step. 3 weeks of nothing. That's all the time I had. I had 8 hours, 15 hours a day just to write my first step. It took me that long. Also, during the same time, I worked around the same time on my second step and my third step. But that's what rehab is. So there you're focused to really understanding what your disease is personally, and then you move on to the second, third step. And then if you're lucky enough, an insurance company paid, 5 months later, you'd leave and you'd have a really deep understanding of your disease. And sometimes that was enough to keep you sober or clean or abstinent for a long period of time, coupled with fellowship and coupled with going to treatment. So they had to make up their own jargon. Then in the 70s, what came along, Joe and Charlie came along, and they didn't like anything that was going on. They didn't like the treatment people coming in, telling them, using all the different jargon, and they really wanted to understand what this book meant. They couldn't find any teachers. So they started to understand what the big book was all about, and they came up with their own interpretation. And before that, nobody was using the 4-column. It was really a 3-column inventory. They created a 4th column. Nobody in AA before that used the actual 3-column inventory. Bill Wilson used that as an example in the big book, but they didn't use that as an inventory during any of the old historic periods of Alcoholics Anonymous. They used a different format. They used Dr. Bob's assets and liabilities checklist. That's what they used. Now, that way of working the 3 columns came about from, there was an Oxford literature book that used that example as an inventory of business, as a business inventory, because they were all businessmen. The kind of businessmen they were is, for example, Bill Wilson used to go to a meeting in Baltimore once a month, and in that meeting was Harvey Firestone. This was the Oxford Group meeting. This wasn't an AA meeting. This was an Oxford Group. These were not alcoholics. Henry Firestone, the owner of Firestone Tires, and Henry Ford. These were the kind of people that would go to the Oxford Group meeting. In 1934, before AA actually got started, there was a big Oxford Group meeting at the Hollywood Bowl. 60,000 people tried to come to that meeting. They had to turn them away. They only could seat 45,000 people. That's how popular this program was, the Oxford Group that helped launch AA. So this work actually worked, and even people that were wealthy at that time, in those times, had problems. It's about how to work on the problem within you, and you are yourself the problem and the problems around you. And then taking a higher powered approach to that thing. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm going to probably be out of time. The point I'm trying to make is there's a precedence to taking the steps. There's also a way of continually working the steps in your program, and there's also a place for studying the steps. What we're hoping to accomplish tomorrow is a UA version. It's an experiment, guys. You guys are the guinea pigs. But we have 2 people here that are very, very, very knowledgeable about the steps. Dion has taken people through the steps in the UA way. I experienced it myself in New York, was it about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, 8 months ago, and he did it again here about a little bit more than a year ago. I've also been taken through the steps by Joe and Charlie. I've been taken through the steps by Wally P. several times. He's an AA historian that does it the old-fashioned way. And anyway, if you want to try to experience, and we're going to try to just to give you guys an experience of that, and hopefully you can walk away with something. I don't think there's anything else I really wanted to say, except that we got these two guys standing at the door, waiting to invite you in to the experience of the fellowship of the Spirit. That's what they're there for. And now I'm supposed to give a little introduction to these guys. I first met Dion when I went back to New York. I was going to UA meetings here for about 2 weeks, and I heard about all the good stuff in UA New York. So my first meeting there, I seen him there, and I took a look at this guy. And in his first chair, he talked about how he was powerless over his mental problem of under-earning. And I heard him phrase that in a way that really made an impact to me. And then he talked about higher power and God. And I says, I think this guy's got something I want. And he impressed me. And at that time, I was like a lost little puppy dog. You know, I was under-earning severely for about 5 years, completely lost all social contact. I mean, I couldn't even tell you how I was at that time. And after the meeting, he invited me to go to the little assembly we had to put stickers up for the UA Share Day. And I said yes. I normally would have said no, but I said yes because I know it was an invitation. And I went there and I had a great time putting these stickers on, this kind of stuff like that. And he welcomed me into the community. He introduced me to Andrew, the founder of UA, and it was a really fun experience. The most fun about the experience is I saw how these guys interacted with each other. They genuinely love each other. They genuinely care about each other. And I haven't seen that in a long time. John, I ran into him about 3 days later at a DA meeting. He was one of the people just sharing, and he was sharing some big book stuff. And tomorrow I'm celebrating 24 years in AA, so thank you guys. So I hear a lot of big book thumping all over the country. It's nothing new to me, but he did it in a way which was kind of interesting. And then as I keep going, and I used to go to New York every 2 weeks, spend 2 weeks here, spend 2 weeks in New York, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks back in New York. So I was doing a meeting a day, and meeting day in New York. So I'd go to DA and UA, and so I'd see John. And then I saw two people that John was working with as sponsees, and I was amazed at the work that these people did. Devin was one, and Laura was another. And I seen the magic that he's capable of working one-on-one with people. It's quite amazing. So I asked him, well, I first asked Dion to be my sponsor. He looked at me and says, I don't know, I think you're going to be too problematical for me. So I got rejected by him, you know, but that's good actually. And then I asked Andrew. Andrew was full, so I asked John to be my sponsor, and he did. And I tell you, every so often, John says something to me that I've heard say before. I've read it somewhere before, but he says it to me in such a way my knees buckle. I mean, it really has an impact on me, and he just shakes every bone in my body because of the way he says it and how he says it. And so I know his interventions really are meaningful to me. So that's why I asked him to come out here and to team up with Dion to hopefully give you guys an experience. And now I'm going to turn it over to them.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, Do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. And if that shows up, the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.